Hello, everybody, and welcome back once again. It's a new season, it's a new year, and it's a new episode. Long delayed, long hiatus here, but we are back with the Dugout Docs. I am John Ismond. Alongside me, my good friend and trusty colleague, Zeke Grissom. Zeke, how's it hanging, my friend?
Oh, it's going great, John. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm ready for baseball season.
Yes, for those who are just listening on the audio, Zeke is decked out in his Braves long sleeve shirt, the classic script A on his hat, and his Zoom background is the beautiful. What is this? I don't want to butcher it. It's SunTrust, right?
Truist Park now.
Truist
They
Park.
dropped
I was
Sun.
close. I was close. Truist Park, the home of the Atlanta Braves. So Zeke is ready. His mind is in April already. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say. Really, John, I've got one question.
Yes.
And I really think the audience is wondering as well.
Mhm.
Are we officially on the Mets payroll yet? Because why not?
We may as well. I mean, Steve Cohen could dish us a couple $100 and we could call it a day, right? I think that's
Yeah.
fair. I don't know if you're wearing the
My
Braves
ankles are
stuff.
great.
With the Brave stuff, he may get a little jealous because you're the one team to finish ahead of him in the standings in the NL East this last year.
Yeah.
After all that money, it's probably going to be the same again this year.
That's what I'm predicting, my friend.
Yes, yes. Well, before we get into everything baseball related, Zeke, we'll just explain kind of what happened last year. So, for those of you who don't know, Zeke and his wife Katie had baby twin boys in January of 2022, coming up on the 1 year birthday pretty soon, right? A couple weeks.
That's right, man. The wife, Katie, is well on her way to planning out that
Mm.
1-year-old birthday party there.
Do we
So
have a
we're excited.
theme, Zeke? Do we have a theme?
Theme to come later. We have one,
Ooh,
but I'm not
okay.
sure if we're ready for the reveal yet.
Okay, okay. Well, we'll have to stay tuned. Join us in a couple of weeks here, and we'll see if we get
Yeah.
any info. Um, so Zeke had his baby boys in January. I
That's
had
right.
my baby girl Eloise in May. Add in the fact that my wife and I moved into a house, and a bunch of crazy stuff
Mhm.
has happened since then. It was a little hard for Zeke and I to carve out time last year for our weekly podcast. So we apologize for those who were, looking out for the Dugout Docs, but we're back.
Mhm. We are back. Hey, funny story, John, before we
Yeah.
keep moving. I remember when you two decided on the name
Yes.
and you texted to me, and I read it, Elois. And I said, John and Sam named their little girl Elois. And she goes, "Are you kidding me?" I said, no, that's what it says here. She said, Eloise, Zeke. Come
Have you ever
on.
read Eloise at the Plaza?
Uh,
Apparently not. Apparently not.
no. Hey, uh, almond, John. I mean, come on.
Alvin. Oh, come on. I stand by that. I stand by that. And
Uh,
who gets to teach who gets to teach Alois how to pronounce things? Me. So
Sam.
the almond pronunciation will live on through her.
Okay, fair
Right?
enough.
Yeah, yes, yes. But we're excited. We're kind of settled in a little bit more this time around.
Mhm.
Excited to talk some baseball. Anything else been going on with you, Zeke? I know you're really eager for the baseball season based on how your professional football team, the Tennessee Titans, have been performing as of late.
Yeah, John. In news around the Grissom household right now is we're trying to get moved into a house,
Ooh,
hopefully here sooner than later. House build is not for the faint of heart. So if you want things to be nice, simple, and easy, don't go building a house, but we're almost there.
there you go.
1-year-old's birthdays for the twin boys, and
No,
really
theme
just kind of
TBD.
looking past the footbut season at this point and ready
Yes.
for some baseball.
Getting ready for some baseball. Well, very good, Zeke. Um, I've been, just same old grind here. Uh, different jobs, that sort of deal. So I've had a couple career changes. Not a bad thing necessarily, but just trying to find the right fit for this dugout doc. So
Absolutely.
hoping we get that. Otherwise, man, what else we've been doing? Enjoying some football. We won't talk about the New Year's Eve game with the Michigan Wolverines.
Oh man.
This is not a football podcast, so I don't want to bore you with any details.
Right. Nothing like a missed targeting call or anything like that. But
Yeah.
Well, I think the only thing to make it sweeter though, John, is the game that happened later that night, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely, man. Kicker you. That's what they call Ohio State University these days.
Yep.
Their trusty kicker with the big shank. Big shank. They came up with a nickname for that game.
Is that right?
Yes, the Shawshank Redemption.
Oh,
Yeah.
dad jokes.
Got it. Yes. Hey, I can use these now. Right.
Give the people what they want, John.
I'm giving the people what they want. Speaking of giving the people what they want, how about we dive into some baseball talk, Zeke? What do you think?
Dive in. There's plenty of it to talk about, John.
Plenty of it to talk about. So what our plan is as of now, there have been a lot of moving pieces since we last talked in terms of rosters, in terms of teams. So what Zeke and I are planning on doing is having a different division over the next several weeks, talking about what the changes are in terms of rosters, what were some additions, what were some losses, and kind of what to expect from these teams moving forward. Think of it like a bit of a season preview before we kind of dive into the season. So just for those who are, don't follow baseball super closely necessarily, Zeke, let's just talk a minute here about how we kind of return to normal. Last year, heading into the season, especially this time, we didn't know if there would be a season. There was the collective bargaining agreement that was not agreed upon until the last second, and we ended up getting all the games in the season that we expected. A little bit of maneuvering with the scheduling. But if you remember, Zeke, last year it was kind of like the CBA was announced, and then over the next 2 or 3 days, it was just a mad rush and a crazy scramble to get deals done, right?
Right.
And this year we're kind of back to normal, where we're kind of seeing things trickle out slowly over the offseason. Which do you prefer, Zeke? Do you kind of like having some time to digest these deals, or do you like the fast-paced action?
I think this offseason has been a good mix, personally, because we got into the offseason a little ways, kind of got past the start of the NFL season hype that keeps sports fans entertained. And then we got into a good spot where we have a consistent roll of deals coming out, guys going ahead and signing. The thing that I can't stand is when players wait until spring training, the start of, to sign deals. And at this point, most of the big names are off the board, and kind of the ones you're looking for have signed already. And I like that.
With an asterisk, right? One big asterisk there, and we'll get to him in a minute. But I think you're throwing a little shade towards our boy Manny Machado. Remember, a couple of years ago, he waited until it was like late February, March, and he finally signed with the Padres. And we're kind of seeing something, or not seeing that this year, which has been nice. I totally agree.
Absolutely.
I think it's been fun. It's also good too, I think, for the players' perspective. We saw a couple guys last year who were free agents kind of limp into the season because they weren't around the organization. They weren't in the clubhouse. So guys like Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, those big names, you basically sign with a team and then you report to spring training like a week later.
Right.
Now these guys kind of have an idea of where they're going. They're probably familiar with everything that they got going on in their new teams. That's a little bit, hopefully we won't see that kind of sputtering out of the gate.
Absolutely, John. Couldn't agree more. And I think you and me have set a good precedent of, we love to see team chemistry, kind of that family atmosphere around teams. And something I really look for in a team. So like you said, get in there, be a part of the clubhouse, and form that community there.
That's right.
It's fun to watch people who play that way.
It is. You've been able to watch that firsthand for quite some time. We'll get into your Braves here in a couple minutes, but 2 big clubhouse leaders in back-to-back off seasons have kind of left you. So we'll see a couple question marks there for the Braves. But before we
Right.
talk about the Braves, as this is our NL East preview, or
Mhm.
kind of preview, I guess we'll call it a preview. Let's talk about some of the changes. There's been one team that's been dominating everything baseball news, and it's
Mhm.
your compadres in the NL East, the New York Mets. So Zeke, we could spend an entire podcast talking about the New York Mets, right?
Right.
What is there? There's been a lot that's been going on. The first thing that happened, if we're going chronologically, the first news happened was not a signing for the Mets, but rather a key player signing elsewhere, and that is
Mhm.
Jacob DeGrom. So the previous ace for the Mets, Jacob DeGrom, is gone. He decided to sign a 5-year, $185 million contract with the Texas Rangers.
Mhm.
There's no denying this is a huge loss to the rotation. What did you think of this move?
I thought this was to be expected,
Yeah,
especially when DeGrom came out at the beginning of the season. He said, "I'm opting out.
yeah,
30 million bucks or whatever it was." He said, "I don't care. I'm opting out." Told me that there is no shot he was coming back.
yeah.
And hindsight could also say too, some of the injury concerns brought up throughout the season with the Mets last year maybe was him holding back just a little bit to make sure he was healthy going into the offseason so he could sign the big deal. Um, but I think everybody saw that he was never coming back.
Yeah.
Now, from a Rays perspective, love it.
Mm,
Grom's out of the division. Don't really have to worry about him. Maybe the Rangers pull something around this year, and best case scenario for the Braves, we meet you in the World Series, but
yeah.
get that hurler somewhere else. And there was a little bit of talk of the Braves actually pursuing a Grom.
Mm.
Did you see talks about that, John?
I did
Early in
not
the offseason?
see. For me, it was mainly like, dang, I got the notification, and I was kind of shocked
Mm-hmm.
because this was really probably the first big splash that we saw in free
Right.
agency was Jacob DeGrom
Mm-hmm.
going to the Rangers. So my
Right.
first thought was they did it again, right? The Rangers had the big signings with, as we mentioned earlier, Seager and Semien, and now we get Jacob DeGrom over to Texas. So I was a bit shocked. So I didn't see a whole lot of. It doesn't seem like that would be a very Braves thing to do to go after DeGrom,
No,
seeing how that front office has worked in the past. That would have been it would
absolutely
have
not.
been nice.
Yeah. I was not to make this about the Braves, but it is relevant with these first two players we're going to talk about.
Mhm.
Is one of the things I thought the Braves might do would be get a veteran hurler,
Yeah.
DeGrom and Verlander being two options. It's
Mhm.
down to a short-term deal, but obviously DeGrom was looking for more of the long-term,
Right.
lock up the value, lock up the security, and that's what he went for.
Yeah, and you can't
And
you can't blame him for that. And in a lot of ways, as you mentioned, we'll kind of segue in here to the guy they did. I think a lot of Mets fans were sad, but that frown was turned upside down when we found out a couple days later that they had signed Justin Verlander to a 2-year deal, as you mentioned
right,
before.
yeah,
And Zeke, in a lot of ways, if I'm a Mets fan and you told me you can have one of these two guys at the contracts that they received, if I'm a Mets fan, I'm probably leaning towards Justin Verlander, right?
absolutely,
And there's a couple reasons why. First off, as you mentioned before, the injury concerns. Jacob DeGrom goes to Texas. He's had a lot of forearm issues, right? There's been talks about
hmm
him needing Tommy John's. I believe he's already gotten it. Is that right? So it would be a second time getting Tommy John's. I may be wrong on that.
hmm
Um,
I think you're right. Yeah,
yeah. So if you're the Rangers, you sign him to a 5-year deal. If he loses a season to Tommy John surgery, your
yep,
window's pretty wide open, right? Texas isn't saying, hey, we're going to win the World Series next year. They're thinking realistically, maybe 2 to 3 years down the road. If you're the New York Mets, based on the roster that you've constructed, your window to win is right now. It is
right,
1 or 2 years. And you, instead of trading those, with those question marks with DeGrom, you trade it for Justin Verlander, who is coming off arguably the best season of his career right after
hmm
having Tommy John surgery. So his production will be there. I think this works out really well for the Mets. Unfortunately for
absolutely,
you, Zeke, but
yep.
I think I would almost prefer it
I
because
think Justin Verlander was one of the best values
yeah,
of the offseason so far, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
You get that veteran presence, which I think in a pitching or in a rotation is huge.
Yes.
And he's got a fresh arm. I
Yep.
mean, at this point, I care more about how's your elbow doing more so than your date of birth. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
Especially with a proven talent like your Verlanders, Scherzers,
Yeah.
DeGroms, etc.
Well, that's the thing too, is the Mets have over the last couple of years, it's like if DeGrom's pitching, Max Scherzer's been having some issues. And if Max Scherzer's
Right.
pitching, DeGrom has some issues. So now at least you get guys, which knock on wood, because we don't know what could happen to Verlander, right? But in terms of
Right.
having a season-ending surgery regarding the elbow, right? We know we're not going to have to worry about that with
Right.
Verlander. So
Exactly.
I think that's really important, and I think that's part of the decision making. Because I heard that when DeGrom had signed, the Mets hadn't even reached out with a final offer yet. So that kind of tells you that the Mets were also not completely heartbroken with missing out on DeGrom.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I was alluding to earlier, I think both parties knew that they were separating. So
Yeah, I think you're right, and it seems like it was an amicable divorce for them.
mhm.
But one thing that I'm excited about, not to make this about the Tigers, right? But Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, my boys who used to pitch in Motown, reunited in
Mhm.
New York. So
Yeah.
Zeke, if I'm being honest with you, man, it's given me a little bit of nostalgia heading into this year.
Hey, that's okay, John.
Yeah.
But I I root for Detroit, so
Yes. Yes.
I think
I
I know where your heart lies in the
Yeah,
NL
yeah,
East.
yeah. No, I know, I know, I know. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. If they're
Hey,
playing the Phillies, I will definitely root for the Mets over the Phillies. That is for sure.
yep.
I'll say that.
Hey, I think Anibal Sanchez is a free agent right now, right?
Oh yeah,
So go
have
ahead
fun.
and
Have fun
root for
with
the
that.
Mets.
Is he with
And
the Mets? Do you say, or are you saying he might? I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
no, I'm saying he should.
He should, yeah. Get all three of them together.
That's right.
Well, too bad. I believe was it Rick Porcello retired? I think Rick Porcello retired, so unfortunately he can't join them. But
One-time Cy
anyway,
Young winner.
and yeah, right. Oh, don't even get me started on that. Okay, that was an instant job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Anywho, so Zeke, we talked about Justin Verlander going there.
Mhm.
Another guy that this is probably the wackiest. I don't think I've ever seen or heard of any story like this before. Carlos Correa, right? The guy who
What a
is
wild ride,
What
man.
a wild ride. It is not done. It's one of those rides where, those roller coasters where they act like it's done and then they're like, "Oh, it's not actually done." Right? That's what this is. It's like
Yeah.
a bad dream, a nightmare that you think is over and then it continued.
Mhm.
Um and there's so much drama around this. So, for those who are behind on the baseball news, Carlos Correa last year was looking for this big deal. He didn't get it. As we mentioned, the window for free agents was a little crunch last year, so he wasn't able to get a long-term deal done. Signs with the Minnesota Twins, 2-year deal, but he opts out after the first. The idea is he wants to go somewhere long-term. He wants a big deal. We thought he had it with the San Francisco Giants. Signs to, what was it, 12 or 13-year deal, something crazy.
Yep. Yep.
But San Francisco Giants perform the physical on Carlos Correa. They have concerns about his health. Presumably, I've heard something related to back problems, right? And
Mhm.
they kind of have a standstill. Well, while they're allegedly trying to talk and figure things out, Carlos Correa goes around and he decides to sign with the New York Mets to a 12-year, $315 million contract, which is insane. But then guess what, Zeke? The Mets perform a physical on Carlos Correa, and it's the same story. So, as of right now, the two sides are at a standstill. Something's got to give. My guess is the Mets are trying to say, hey, we're going to give you this money, but if you miss time due to this specific concern, we're not going to compensate you. And
Mhm.
Correa's like, well, if you really love me for who I am, then you would just sign me unconditionally. So
Yep.
it's like this dramatic reality TV love story going on, love triangle, if you will.
Yep.
So, what do you make of this? What was your response when he ended up signing with New York?
Few things on this.
Uh huh.
First of all, um, how rich, which we'll get into this in a second, but how rich do you have to be to where I myself, as an average person, can go to sleep thinking Carlos Correa has a $350 million deal.
Mm-hmm.
I wake up the next morning to the first notification saying Giants are out. And then the very next notification, all within a 6-hour window of me sleeping, Steve Cohen dishes out 315 million. Boom, no problem.
Crazy.
And to go along with that, he specifically says, we heard what was going on with the Giants. They seemed to think something was wrong with him, but I went out and got my guy.
Yep.
I don't care what the report said. I don't care what the physical says. I got my guy.
But now you
Only
look
for
at
that to be rescinded.
exactly. And so that tells you that, the Mets were initially like, hey, we don't care. We know there's some issues. We're fine. But now that they're backtracking, that tells you there's got to be some serious concern.
Yeah, yeah. And I was reading up on this today or yesterday, doesn't matter. Kind of the history of clauses put in deals,
Yeah.
specifically with Scott Boras clients, which is the agent of Korea. So, first of all, that's a problem, Scott Boras, because he's a hardliner. But they talked about Mike Piazza, I believe, did a deal because there's concerns with his spine or cause if he missed significant time due to that specifically. Things would happen to help the team. He also did a deal similar to that with JD Martinez a few years back regarding some ailment he had, can't remember. And once again, that ended up being a non factor. So, like you said, the reports are that he's looking into some sort of clause regarding that. But the article also mentioned that though Correa has not missed any time, there were concerns expressed at the end of this past year regarding his lower leg. So, although he hasn't missed time, he was, kind of put on notice, injury concerns or whatever towards the end of this last season. And obviously, this physical presents a big issue. So,
Yeah.
but my question for you, John, is let's play the card that the Mets end up backing out, or they say, we can't do the 13-year deal you're looking for, but we can do a 2-year deal of whatever value. Here it is. If you're other teams on the market, what's your thought process? And Correa, what are you starting to think now that you've had two teams back out on long-term deals?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it really kind of depends on the team. It seems like a team like the Mets would be a team that would be happy to do a 2-year deal, just because their window, like I mentioned before, their window's right now.
Oh yeah,
I could see even the Los Angeles Dodgers, they just lost Trey Turner, right? I could see them saying, hey, you know what? We know there's long-term issues, but we want you right now. I could see them doing that.
Braves even. If you
Yeah.
told me 2 or 3 year
Ansby's
deal,
gone. Yeah.
yeah,
No, you're absolutely right. So Carlos Correa will find a home. He will.
yeah.
He's too talented of a player not to be signed.
Had a good year last year too.
Yeah, he did. He really did. He proved his worth. I just don't know if he's going to get the long-term deal he wants to.
I think at this point that's a no.
Yeah.
Unless it's just market manipulation of some sort where it says, well, we'll decrease the annual average value by extending it. You'll still get X amount of money, but
yeah. Well, let's say for the sake of argument, let's say Carlos Correa gets what he wants. He's in a Mets uniform this year. So, for the sake of this year, do you think he significantly changes this team? Do you think the addition of Carlos Correa, the addition of Justin Verlander, do you think the New York Mets are the favorites to go to the World Series in the National League if they both sign?
I think if you had a person who analyzed things based on statistics, based on look and feel,
Mhm.
I would say yes.
Yeah.
That the only outcome that is a success is being in a World Series, if not winning one at this particular time. Anything short of that, I think, is a failure.
Yeah.
And this isn't just every team's goal is to win a World Series. Anything less than that's a failure. No, that's not. It's not that sort of thing. This is
Yeah.
our payroll is 2 times bigger than the third best team.
Yeah.
If we don't
Yeah.
win, that's a problem.
This is the definition of putting all your chips in the table, right? Or putting all the
Yeah.
chips in the center of the table. If you lose, you're done. Like if this experiment fails, it's a massive disappointment.
Yeah.
I think if the Mets forget about winning the division, if they don't win the pennant, if they honestly, I would go as far to say if they don't win the World Series in the next 2 seasons, this is going to be a colossal failure. I'll give them
Yeah.
the two because
Absolutely.
that's how long Justin Verlander's contract is. When that contract's up, if you haven't won a World Series, I mean, I would be disappointed if I'm a Mets fan for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now,
Absolutely.
in addition to that, right? One more guy that we got to mention is Brandon Nimmo, right? It's
Mhm.
funny because Brandon Nimmo a couple years ago was a guy that I would jokingly like. Zeke and I were in a fantasy baseball league together, and we would always. You remember this? The Brandon Nimmo
What's
thing.
that?
You and I would always like send trade proposals to one another, and then
Yep.
I would always jokingly say, "Hey, can I get this big shot for Brandon Nimmo?" Like a joke because he wasn't very good. I'd be
Right.
like,
Right. Right.
"How about you give me Tatis? If you give me Tatis, I'll give you a Brandon Nimmo." Like as a
Right.
joke.
Right.
But all jokes aside, he actually played pretty well. He had his best season
Mhm.
in a Mets uniform last year, hitting 274, 64 RBIs. He was also signed to an 8-year, $162 million
Mhm.
deal, which I feel like is a lot.
Yeah.
Then again, we're talking about a team that's owned by Steve Cohen. So
Yep.
money is not literally not an object.
Right. Yeah. No, that's an overpay for a guy. I just want that guy. So I'm gonna just make it easy for him. This is way better than you're gonna get from any other team. Let me just go ahead and buy it.
It's too much. It's too much. Like I mean, Brandon Nimmo was good, but Jeff McNeil was
Mhm.
playing better than him last year. Is Jeff McNeil going to get that same contract?
Right.
I don't think so.
Yep.
So yeah, I agree. It's an overpay, and that begs the question. We mentioned Steve Cohen before with these Mets, but the big thing that's kind of transcending everything. People are saying, "Hey, is this even fair? Like he's
Mhm.
ruining the competitive balance of baseball." Um, but
One
again,
thing before you get into that, John,
yeah.
he made another 2 big deals because I'm looking at the stuff right
Mhm,
now.
mhm.
He also extended Edwin Diaz, who had a
Oh,
great year
that's
last year.
right. I forgot about that. Yep.
19 million per year.
Best
Um,
closer in baseball this last season. Fair to say.
maybe. But you can look at guys like Craig Kimbrell,
Hmm.
have a great year one year, next year,
Yeah.
meh, fall off
What
the
do you?
radar. And then, uh, excuse me if I'm saying it wrong, but
No, it's okay.
Cody Singa or Kodai Singa, um, the guy coming over from one of the leagues out in the East.
Yeah.
He's getting 15 million per year. So a couple other pretty, I mean, that's another, what, $33 million in 2 other players. So
Yeah. When you add that to the outstanding contracts that they have with Francisco Lindor, for example, right?
yeah,
Who's making a ton,
32 million per year.
insane amount.
Yep, yep, yep.
And this team is freaking loaded. We haven't even talked about Pete Alonso yet. It's
Yeah.
pretty much there's talent everywhere, in the bullpen, in the rotation.
Mhm.
So I don't know, man. I can say I do think the New York Mets roster, if all these signings go through, got a lot better.
Oh yeah. I mean, no doubt about it. Especially being in their division,
You're
like
scared.
these are the sort of things that you just can't compete with.
Yeah.
You just gotta outplay them, outsmart them, essentially.
And we've seen it happen before. I mean,
Mhm.
there've been teams that have tried and failed at this. A team that you look at is, I would even say like the San Diego Padres, right? Kind of throwing money
Yeah.
everywhere, trading for Juan Soto and signing Machado to a massive deal, and Tatis gets a giant extension, and they haven't made it past the NLCS yet. So money, people always say, "Oh, Steve Cohen, he's spending too much. It's not fair." Until the
Mhm.
Mets actually do something and actually win something, I don't think
Yeah.
that's a valid argument. I mean, it's within the confines of the rules. He's not tampering. He's not doing anything illegal. So this
Yeah.
is allowed. So the people who are saying this is a problem, I don't think so. I mean, the
Yeah.
Mets
I
lost the
mean,
wild card
to
last
be
year.
determined.
Yeah, to be determined. That's right. Now,
Yeah.
if they win 2 or 3 World Series back to back, then you have that argument. But we
Yeah.
see in the NFL, we see in the NBA, right? Teams win
Mhm.
multiple championships in the span of several years. The Mets haven't even
Yeah.
been to an NLCS in a decade. No, it has been in a decade, but you know what I mean, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I'm not to the point where I'm saying this is unfair. Um, but
I'm not
again,
either. I'm not even bitter. I'm just
it,
kind of like, well,
it
the
fuels
Mets
your
are paying
fire.
a target that's humongous
Yeah.
on their backs.
Absolutely. I think if you're the Braves or another team in the division, it fuels your fire.
Mhm.
You're like, you know what? They spent a lot. Who cares? We won the division last year. Like
Right.
you guys are getting all the news. We're going to quietly do our thing, and we're going to keep marching forward. And
Absolutely.
as we've said before, with the Mets, we'll believe it when we see it, because we
Mhm.
haven't seen it yet. So,
Right.
you know,
Mets do Mets things, as we've talked about several times on this podcast.
absolutely, absolutely. So that's kind of our take on the Mets there, and we'll probably before the season starts talk about our predictions
Mhm.
for the NL East and whatnot as things get a little bit closer to the season. I
Yeah.
think Vegas wise, they're probably going to be the favorites in the East, but
Mhm.
in terms of actual playing, it's hard to pick them until you see them actually win a division. So
Right. Right.
we'll see, and we'll
One
see what happens with Correa.
one last thing I'm gonna throw out there too, um, for people who haven't been on top of it. For reference, okay, there's this thing called the luxury tax that teams, if they spend too much money on players, they have to pay this tax. I don't know. Do you know where it goes to? Like, where does the money go?
Yeah,
You don't know.
I honestly don't know.
That's something I want to look up because it's
Yeah,
a good question.
yeah,
Because this is a lot of money.
yeah.
So the Mets, because they are spending so much money on players, they will pay somewhere around $110 million
Mm.
just in taxes. So that's money that just leaves their organization for nothing. And that is more money than a third of the MLB teams. So we're talking like 10 teams don't even spend that much money on their entire team.
That could probably
That's what
pay
we're talking
for
about.
like the Oakland A's payroll multiple times over.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking that payroll might pay for 2 or 3 teams
Yeah,
combined,
it's crazy. It's crazy.
possibly. So, anyways, that's it on the Mets.
That's a good, yeah,
Money
no,
bags over there.
it's a good place to start. It's an interesting, it really, that number is even surprising me. Like that puts
Yeah.
things into perspective about how unprecedented this is. Uh,
Mhm.
so
Yep.
that's the Mets. They've definitely been the darlings of the media. Um,
Right.
but in terms of the actual darlings of the field and the winners of the NL East last year, let's talk about a team that's near and dear to your heart in the Atlanta Braves.
That's
Now,
right.
I think the biggest storyline, I would say, you might beg to differ, but I think losing Dansby Swanson, having him leave Atlanta and sign with the Chicago Cubs is probably the biggest story for the Braves this offseason. Dansby goes 7 years, 177 million to Chicago after probably the best offensive season of his career. Would you agree?
Mhm. Yeah.
We hit
Yep.
277, 96 RBIs in 25 home runs. People forget that this is a guy that can bring quite a bit of power to the table. So
Mhm.
this is a huge piece to lose, not just in terms of the lineup, in terms of his fielding, but also in terms of him being a big clubhouse leader in Atlanta. And I mentioned before, the previous year you lose Freddie Freeman, who is really Mr. Brave, and now you
Right.
lose a big guy in Dansby Swanson. It's got to impact things a little bit. What was your take on Dansby related things.
Going into the offseason, once we made it to the offseason, I really had little hope that he would return.
Yeah.
Okay. Had a big market, had several big signings last year with guys, up the middle guys, second base, shortstop. You mentioned earlier the Rangers guys.
Yeah.
And that sets a big precedence. And the Braves have shown time and time again they're not willing to pay those humongous AAV contracts. Okay, we'll get into in a second. But they really like the team friendly deals, and they seem to be really good at getting those.
Yeah.
So when I look at it, if I look at their payroll, how much did Dansby get per year?
Let's see, 177 over 7. So that's what, 20
Come on, John.
something? I'm sorry, my mental math is not great right now. Let's see. 177 over 7 is 25.3 roughly per year.
Right. So I'm looking at the Braves payroll.
Yeah.
Austin Riley, 21 million per year. Matt Olson, 21 million per year. Ronald Acuna Jr., who many people are picking to be MVP.
Yeah.
12 million per year. Spencer Strider, Rookie of the Year, 12 million per year. Ozzie Albies, perennial All-Star, 5 million per year.
These
are the sort of contracts the Braves are doing.
Yeah.
And I never once believed the Braves would get anywhere close to giving him more money than Austin Riley.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it ended up being. So,
no, I think you're absolutely right. And this is a front office where you and I have texted about this, where we'll say, if the Braves really want you, they will go. They're very, very aggressive if you're within the organization about signing guys to long-term deals when they're very young, because if they continue to play at the level that they are, they know the longer and longer we wait on extending these guys, we're not going to get a good value for them. So you've seen that with multiple guys through the Braves, very young, to the point where I've seen some of these extensions. I'm like, are we being a little bit premature here, Atlanta? And oftentimes they're not. I don't think there's a bad contract, one single bad contract within that entire organization.
I've got one.
Okay,
Marcell Ozuna.
What's the one?
Marcell Ozuna.
Yeah. Okay.
But
that was a free agent signing, though. That wasn't a guy that came up within their own organization. You know what I mean?
That's true. And I'll say to that too, John. I think the Braves, as well as the league as a whole, as best I can tell, is so confident in the Braves' ability to scout players out and to develop them that they see a guy come up through the system like Spencer Strider or Michael Harris. They say, yep, they are who we thought they were. Let's go ahead and lock them in.
Yeah.
Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna, other examples. Austin Riley is another example. But in Swanson's case, he's just, and this is one of the reasons why you love him, is he's got the mentality of a winner. He's got the cockiness in a humble way, but he definitely takes pride in who he is and what he does and in the game itself.
Yeah.
And he bet on himself, and it's paying off. Because I am absolutely positive that for the last 3 years, the Braves have tried their best to sign him to a 6-year, $73 million deal.
Yeah.
I know that they've tried to do that.
Yeah.
But just didn't pan out, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great player. I think he's going to do well in Chicago. There's talks too. Have you heard the whole talk of he recently got engaged? So his fiance's the star soccer player for Chicago's women's soccer team. So there's been talks of that. His grandpa, I'm sure you heard his intro press conference. His grandfather was a giant, Cubs fan as well as a Braves fan. And so it seems like it's the perfect fit. So my thought too is maybe he's been planning this for a little while.
Yeah, I agree. And funny story to go along with that. Whenever a couple days before he did sign, Katie and I were talking about it, and something got brought up about his wife, and just what you just said. I said, no. you don't get it, Katie. That doesn't play a factor at all into things like this. When you're talking about $20 million plus per year, that doesn't matter. Guys get over that. And then that comes about and it happens. And
Mhm.
Katie said, I told you so.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I
And
said,
she's right.
might
She's
be right.
and
You might
you
be
know
right.
but it does remind you that at the end of the day, we're talking about
Mhm.
people, not
Yeah.
just baseball players, but taking into account like family. It matters to these guys, and
Yeah.
Dansby. I'm sure you're wishing him nothing but the best as he moves on
Yeah.
to. This one hurts a little bit less than Freddie Freeman, I'm sure. But
Absolutely,
it still
man.
stings. It still stings.
The Freddie Freeman saga was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
This, uh, my dad would disagree because he's been very bitter about it. Sorry, Dad, but I knew it was coming. Um, I think he handled it well. I think the whole situation was handled as good as you could expect.
Yeah. Very
Um,
professional.
one last thing, just to kind of prop Swanson up a little bit. The article that I found the most interesting was talking about when Swanson was negotiating with the Cubs. As soon as at the onset of them discussing terms, he got one of his guys to go and do basically an audit of the
I
Cubs
did hear about this.
organization,
Yeah.
their farm system, and basically went to their organization and was like, look, for me to sign here, you have to convince me how we're going to win.
Hmm.
And that just gives me goosebumps. That gets me fired up. And I'm like, that's the sort of guy we're losing, the guy who cares
Yeah.
about winning. And he knows, I'm not just going to sign for the money, but
Right.
they convinced me we can win and we will win. So
Yeah. No,
kudos to him. He's a good guy.
I totally agree. That was a cool story to be like, hey, and he was calling up a lot of former players and whatnot, and
Yeah.
making sure that this was the right move for him. And says a lot
Mhm.
about the professional that he is. And this isn't a guy that's going to sign like 7-year 177 and then just completely plateau. I think his best
Yeah.
days really are ahead. He's just getting a good feel for the game and really kind of coming into his own. Unfortunately, it was in a contract year for the Braves, so
Yeah.
um, you know
I think with the Cubs too, and we'll get into this later, I think he's in a position to where he can become like
the
a
guy.
true bona fide leader,
Yeah,
the guy. But
absolutely.
we'll save that for a little
Yeah, we got a
after.
lot to talk about with the Cubs. And hey, maybe Zeke, maybe this just means to see your old guy again, you'll have to come up and take a trip to the friendly.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
that gives you another reason to come on up. So we'll have to see what we can do about that. Well,
Absolutely, man.
getting back to, I know Dansby's gone, but let's talk about some of the
Uh-huh.
things. It's been a fairly, I think you'd agree, a fairly quiet off season for the Braves. That could
Yeah.
go one of two ways, right? Because you could be
Mhm.
successful like the Mets and do what they're doing, but the Braves have always been an organization that triumphs with what they've been able to do internally. And
Right.
you mentioned the big free agent spots that they've had over the last 4 or 5 years has been Marcelo Ozuna, which was a total flop for non-baseball related things. But you look at kind of how things shaked off. You do lose Kenley Jansen, who was really solid in the bullpen last year. I know that one hurts a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
thoughts on that? He just signed with Boston.
Yeah. Kenley Jansen, I was not sad to see him go
Mm-hmm.
for a few reasons. Throughout the season last year, every time he went on the mound, I was very nervous.
Yeah.
Kind of like Will Smith because he always had runners on. There was always guys there. It was never really a clean inning. But at the end of the day, his numbers were great.
Mm-hmm.
He converted most of his saves outside of like a 1 week stretch where you just didn't have his stuff for some reason. Turned out good. I think he lost significant value though this going into this year because of the new bases.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about this later, but the bases are going to be bigger.
Mm-hmm.
The whole league expects steals to
Yep.
be a bigger factor, and he has by far the least, if not one of the least, steal friendly deliveries. I mean, you might as
Yeah.
well just walk down to second base if you're
Yeah.
going to be there.
Yeah. Sure.
And I think that played a part.
Yeah.
Um, last factor too was Raisel Iglesias came in and looked excellent. when the Braves traded for him last season, and I think they just felt good enough about what they have with him.
Yeah. And
So,
it's quite the far cry from a couple of years ago. The Braves really went out and they said, "Hey, this is our problem. This is what likely kept us from winning a championship," and they
right.
really patched that hole quite nicely to
Yeah.
where the organization says, "Hey, Kenley's going to go." Um, that's a good spot to be in because
Right. Right.
Kenley Chance is probably one of the best known closers in baseball
Yeah.
and has
I
been
mean,
really effective.
he's a Mariano Rivera, not quite. I
Yeah.
mean, not to that effect,
Yeah.
but he is kind of this generation's version of that, I think,
Yeah.
to a lesser degree.
Yeah. The other big thing that happened, and this was probably the biggest splash that the Braves did. One thing the Braves, it kind of reminds you of last year, right? Where the
Mhm.
Braves made a trade with the lowly Oakland Athletics and then immediately turn around and sign their guy to a long-term deal. This time,
Mhm.
instead of it being Matt Olson, it was the catcher position. And the Braves traded for Sean Murphy, who has been,
Yeah.
this is one of those guys where you kind of talent goes to not die in Oakland, but it's never mentioned or never really brought up. And this was a guy, I know there was rumblings about him being traded last year at the trade deadline, ends up staying with the A's throughout the rest of the season.
Mhm.
Batted was really, really solid, especially when you look at him compared to other catchers, right? Batting
Right.
250, 66 RBIs, 18 home runs in the Coliseum. And he won a Gold Glove in 2021. So this is a guy that tells you he's still fairly young at 28 years old. I mean, that's
For a catcher, yeah.
for a catcher.
Mhm.
And he puts up good numbers. I think having a luxury in this league is when you have a catcher that contributes in the lineup. Oftentimes we see
Absolutely.
catchers slide down to the 8 spot or the 9 spot now that we have the universal DH. And you're lucky if they're batting 180. But
Right. Right.
if you can have a guy that kind of fills in this role like Murphy can, I think it's a nice fit.
Yeah. Honestly, by far the biggest surprise of the offseason for me, but I think around the league too, because the Braves are sitting so nicely at catcher, at least it seemed that way,
Mhm.
with literally two all-star catchers from this past year.
Yeah.
Um, so uh, to give as much away in prospects, because I think you and I talked before, Kyle Muller was a guy that I thought could be this year's Kyle Wright as
Mhm.
far as a breakout candidate, but we'll see.
Well, I think.
But
Sorry, go ahead. Continue.
um, what I gathered, though, from the press conference and reading things since then, is the Braves identified Sean Murphy's ability um, from a defensive perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, we talked about the offense, but they identified his ability to call games, to frame pitches, and to throw guys out. And as I mentioned earlier, I think the league is expecting steals to play a bigger factor, which I think will be exciting for the league. Um, but having a guy like Murphy that could potentially throw guys out versus the guys we had before, I think really played into the Braves system. And I think it'll be a nice fit.
Absolutely. And, again, not to be all about offense, but this is a deal that makes a lot more sense considering that we do have a universal DH now for the Braves, right? This
Right.
is this is a guy who, hey, if he needs to take a day off from behind the plate, which catchers often do, you can
Mm-hmm.
put him into the lineup and feel pretty comfortable at the DH position. So I really do like this for the Braves. Like you
Yeah,
mentioned, I mean, you still had Travis d'Arnaud, who was one of definitely a top 10, if not higher, in terms of offensive catchers. But this just adds a little bit more to the bag for Atlanta.
absolutely. And I think you've seen a league-wide trend of teams going to a two catcher setup where
Yeah.
it's kind of a 65-35 split.
Mhm.
And now the Braves have two excellent options there.
Yep.
So good move. A little surprised, but
Yeah.
no complaints from me.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, having two running backs in the NFL level, right? A lot of backfields are like that now. And
Right.
I guess you could say that's becoming the trend for catchers as well. The one thing that I wanted to talk with you about, and you brushed upon this a little bit earlier when you were talking about DeGrom. I think the one thing most people expected, rather than going for a catcher, a lot of people were thinking, hey, this is the time for the Braves to add to that rotation and kind of
Right.
solidify with a Chris Bassett, or maybe you go out and get Taijuan Walker, one of these guys that are available on the market.
Mhm.
The Braves stay put. They extended their star Steven Strider, right, the rookie, to a long-term deal, which I love. I think that was like we talked before. They find these guys who are talented when they're young, and they get good value for them, and they definitely did that with Strider. But that's the biggest question entering 2023, I think, for the Braves, is how is this starting pitching going to hold up? Did it surprise you that there were no big splashes made on that front?
It did. I expected, if we were going to get anybody, Verlander was the guy that I was looking for.
Yeah.
Veteran presence. I knew it was going to be a short-term deal, which fits the Braves mold.
Mm-hmm.
They now have a pretty strong history of doing the 1 or 2 year deals with players.
Like Morton.
Right. With Morton, I mean, even dating back to Josh Donaldson,
Mm-hmm.
before Ozuna.
Mm-hmm.
He had a couple other guys, and they all panned out well. So I was like, let's get Verlander in here, mix in with the young pitchers, kind of help mold them along with Morton, and go from there. But I think what the organization ended up deciding on is we've got a lot of young talent in pitching. We
Mm-hmm.
invest heavily in pitching, just as an organizational philosophy. You've got Max Fried, you've got Kyle Wright, Charlie Morton, Spencer Strider. Those 4 spots are locked up, assuming health, which is a big assumption, but that's all you can do. And then there's a plethora of guys that could be this year's Kyle Wright or Spencer Strider.
Yeah.
Mike Soroka coming back from 2 Achilles tears, which is just heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, he was a Cy Young candidate.
Absolutely.
Expect him back. You've got a guy, Bryce Elder, who's a young guy, who's a little bit of a change of pace pitcher, but made some strong appearances in the playoffs last year,
Mm-hmm.
as well as late in the season. Guys like Ian Anderson, they've shown good perspective. And a couple, their number 1 prospect at this point, still a pitcher, had great success last year. So I truly think, personally, that when Verlander went off the board, the Braves said, well, we've got our staff.
Yeah.
Maybe they trade for somebody at the deadline if things are sitting well, but I think that's the decision they made, and I'm okay with it.
Well, and there is something to be said. I know we see this a lot in other sports. Like I see this in the NBA a lot. Um, but sometimes you have to leave an absence for stars to be born through opportunity. And
Right.
I think part of it is the Braves said, hey, we could get another guy who could be well. We know he'll be great, but that takes away an opportunity from us finding the next Spencer Strider, right? It creating this void where somebody needs to step up and perform can be a really good thing for an organization. And that may play into this as well.
Absolutely. Because despite all of the guys that the Braves traded away in the Sean Murphy deal, and it's for that very reason, the Braves' confidence in their ability to develop guys and what they already have, that they were able to do a Sean Murphy style deal.
Right.
They
Right.
go and get a big name, but they
Right.
trade away a lot of prospects. And that gives them the ability to not have to go out there and sign Verlander, because they still just have a wealth of potential there. So,
Yeah.
kind of like in fantasy baseball, John. It's called the pumpkin plan.
Yes, yes,
Um,
that's right. That's right.
but you always, I mean, you and me know you can never have enough roster spots
Mhm.
to store potential talent. You can just never have enough.
Yep.
And I think some people just don't realize that.
Yeah.
But you never know when you're going to happen upon some guy. And like you said, got to have that opportunity to give him a chance.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
good thought, John. I hadn't thought about that from that perspective.
well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Well, yeah. So it's it's going to be interesting. I think the Braves are very dependable. They didn't do anything, super sexy, I'd say, to get the attention of a
No.
lot of people. But when you have a well-oiled machine like they do, you don't really have to do a ton. So I think they're going to be fine. I think it's still,
Mhm.
the difference heading into this season compared to last season. Last season, it was a very clear two-horse race with the moves that, this we had the Scherzer signing that we were talking about with New York last year. So it seemed like it was going to be the Braves and it was going to be the Mets. The main
Right.
difference is this year, I think you can make the argument that in the NL East it's turned into a three-horse race. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's where the team, they didn't win the division. They were the last team. I believe they were the last team in the wild card spot. It was either them or San
Yeah.
Diego. I can't quite remember who had the better record. I think it was San Diego was the last team in. But anywho,
Mhm.
the Philadelphia Phillies, the team that snuck in the wild card, had a little bit of a Cinderella run, I would say, into the World Series before losing to a team that felt like they were destined to rewrite history and rewrite their saga and scandal, the Houston Astros. Um,
Right.
so the Philadelphia Phillies make it all the way to the World Series, much to your dismay.
Yep.
It was difficult. NLDS was a tough watch.
I was a little bit bitter for a few weeks
Yeah,
or months. I don't
yeah.
know.
But then it
Maybe
was
weeks.
probably a little sweet then to see them lose in the big one. So it's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it all evens out. But the Phillies, so they had a great run. Big thing that we heard kind of as the season went on is Bryce Harper having some lingering issues. Gets surgery performed as soon as the postseason is done. It's confirmed he's going to miss some time in 2023. So some people were looking at it like, oh my gosh, like what are we going to do? What are the Phillies going to do? Well, what do they do, Zeke? They go out there and they sign probably one of the best, definitely a five-tool player in Trey Turner,
Mhm.
a guy that was extremely talented in Washington, gets traded to the Los Angeles Dodgers, and now he gets his long-term deal that he's been looking for, 11 years, $300 million to go to the city of brotherly love. What were your thoughts there? Good deal, bad deal, overpay that was justified? What do you think?
When you start getting into these eight, for me, 6 to 8 years and over,
Mm-hmm.
you start getting diminishing returns. But
Oh,
I
of
think
course.
that's just the model teams are in at this point. As they say, the only way we can afford these big names is to just stretch out the contract.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing good and well inflation's a thing, and $20 million this year is nothing in 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But
Mm-hmm.
for Trey Turner, I mean, I think they're paying for three, we'll say 4 to 6 good years of Trey Turner.
Yep.
And then just knowing he's going to be on the payroll for an additional 5 or 6.
Yep.
So, I mean, I would love to have Trey Turner on my team right now. I would have been upset if the Braves would have dished out 300 million for him.
Yeah.
But that's just the way I'm trained as a Braves fan. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
you
I,
know, to each
I
their own.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I mean, there's no doubt this guy's amazingly talented. He does a lot of things at such a high level. He does so many things at such a high level. It makes him
Yeah.
sort of an enigma. Um, and we knew he'd get a deal like this. But you and I have talked about this, and you prefaced it earlier, but we've talked about this quite a few times on the podcast of when you dish out a deal like this, you are overpaying to get about 4 to 5 years of really, really solid value that makes
Mm-hmm.
it worth the contract that you're paying, knowing that you're going to have to eat some of that money later on. We talked about this Miguel Cabrera deal, right? I mean, the guys, I love Miggy so much, but I mean, he's not what he was when he signed his contract, and we knew that. Our
Mm-hmm.
window was about a decade ago. So the Phillies window is right now. I mean, kind of like what we said with the Braves. I think this is a team that is shaping up to compete for a World Series this year, next year. I'd probably say I think the Phillies, based on their roster, have a little bit more leeway than the Mets. I don't
Yeah.
think they're quite as win now, but they're
Mm-hmm.
still very much in the conversation.
Yeah.
in the NL
Of
East.
their big signings, it looks like 20 through 2025
Yeah.
is probably about their window.
Yeah. And that's great. I mean,
Yeah.
that's exactly what you
3 good years.
3 good years is fantastic, and they've done a
Yeah.
great job of um, doing that. But this is a classic. I mentioned the Miguel Cabrera deal. Guess who the GM is of the Philadelphia Phillies? Our boy, big Dave Dombrowski. So this is the very
Right.
Dave Dombrowski move.
Yep.
Absolutely. So, when I saw those numbers flash up, I was like, yeah, that's not a surprise at all. Dombrowski's going to get his guy. And he did. He did it with Miguel Cabrera, did it with Prince Fielder, and now in Philly, he's doing it with Trey Turner. So great talent. But, something that you mentioned that I'm thinking of as well, Trey Turner's a really fast guy. The bigger bases that you talked about, this makes his value a little bit better. I think he's going to increase the amount of steals that he has for Philadelphia. So a guy that can rake for power and also get on base at a high percentage, stealing the base, as a leadoff guy, tremendously valuable.
One of the things I look at in a guy like Trey Turner, though, is his skill set has a lot to do with his speed.
Mhm.
And I have no research backed basis for this statement, but I would think that that leads to a shorter career path.
Yeah.
As much running as he does, as quick as he is,
Mhm.
as soon as he loses that edge there, does that decrease in value? So that's one of the things I kind of bake into
Sure.
my analysis of him.
No, and I agree. And that's something I texted you about too. I'm like, just the way that he plays, the elite freak athleticism, it's not going to be around when, how old is he now? He's got to be what, 28? Let's see, Trey Turner.
He is 29 and a
29.
half.
So you're telling me when he's 40 in his final year contract, he's not going to be playing at this level. It's kind of like to equate it to like an NBA player, like Russell Westbrook. He's just an amazing athlete, just drives into the lane, gives it all, just powers his way through. That worked extremely well when he was in his 20s. Now that he's getting older and he's in his 30s now, whenever he tries to do that, he kind of looks like a fool, right? So
Right.
same kind of deal. The trade, but there are guys that kind of change their game as they get up in age, who become more of a 3-point shooter, a specialist, and they still find success. We'll see. Maybe Trey Turner develops something. Who knows, right? But
Right.
the good news is for Phillies fans, he's going to provide you tremendous value over the next couple of years. One thing that I have seen that is a little bit something to be wary of is he does have a pretty poor history of chasing pitches. So he tends to swing at some balls outside of the zone a little bit too often. Very similar to a premier, in quotations, shortstop that the Tigers signed, Javier Baez, right? So you wonder about that a little bit. I think Trey Turner's much more talented than Baez, so I don't think that'll be a problem, but his K
I
rate
think
is
that's
a
a
little
different
concerning.
tier there.
Yeah, no, I agree. But we'll see. I'm, trying to give you hope over there, Zeke, that it's not going to be. So
You're right.
in addition to Trey Turner, they signed a guy. They took a guy away from the Mets that I think was a good signing in Taiwan Walker. So he gets a 4-year deal for the Phillies. He's shown signs of greatness. He's also struggled a little bit with consistency. No doubt he makes that rotation a lot better.
Absolutely.
He joins Zach Wheeler, who really has kind of had a breakout couple of seasons. He's been excellent. Aaron Nola, who's a little shaky as well. But then you get Taiwan Walker and Ranger Suarez, who I know you and I have talked about him before. He's starting to see his potential there in the rotation. So having Ranger Suarez as probably your number 4 guy in the rotation, it's a pretty good spot to be at.
Absolutely. And interesting you say that, John, because I'm looking at their stats right now. And Taiwan Walker versus Ranger Suarez, ERA 3.49 versus 3.65. Games started, both 29. Innings pitched, 157 versus 155.
Wow.
Strikeouts, 132 versus 129. So you're literally talking the same player.
Yeah. Hey, and
that's pretty wild.
You take that. I would absolutely take that. I mean, both guys were great last year. So, if I'm a Phillies fan, hey, I'm feeling pretty good
Mhm.
with what you
Yeah,
get there.
absolutely.
So
And
yeah,
I put a lot into playoff experience too. And
absolutely.
coming off a World Series, it didn't pan out for the Nationals a couple years back, but in most cases, I think that's a springboard into good years. So
Yeah, and there's a lot you learn just as much, if not more, from losing. Probably more from losing in those
mhm,
experiences than you do from winning. So you look at a team like the Braves, right? You guys had to stumble before you could rise to that level, and I think the
right,
narrative it kind of feels like that's what's going to happen with Philly. It really does.
right, right.
This is a team that's they're right on the doorstep here.
Mhm.
We are a little worried about the health of Bryce Harper, and people should be. But if he comes back, and from what I'm hearing, he's going to be at the same level. This is not going to hinder his abilities at all once he makes a full recovery. I mean,
Right.
this is a team that really won and kind of crushed teams in their path with their bats in the postseason.
Yeah.
And now you add Taiwan Walker. This is another team that has a spot in that rotation if they want to make a couple deals at the deadline. They could really, if they make that uh, rotation lethal. They added Craig Kimbrell to the bullpen, which mixed
Yeah.
bag for sure. But if he plays up to his potential as well, now you've shored up both your bullpen and your starting rotation. It's pretty scary.
Yeah. It's a pretty scary team.
Yeah.
Um, if you look at their lineup, top five guys are amongst the best in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Trey Turner, Kyle Schwarber.
Mm-hmm.
Schwarber bad to lead off, but you'd expect Trey Turner to
Sure.
too. Followed by Reese Hoskins, who
Mm-hmm.
once he gets going, especially as weather warms up,
That
he
guy,
just hits bombs.
Reese Hoskins, gets more hate for no reason. And he does. Like, people just
Yep.
always crap on him. And it's like,
Yep.
why? The guy is
He
just
might be one of the more underrated players in the league,
I
honestly.
agree. I agree. It's like everyone's like, oh, it's Reese Hoskins again. It's like, yeah, he'll have one game where he strikes out 3 or 4 times, but then the next game he'll hit 2 home runs. So it's
He had
Anywho,
30 bombs
continue.
last year.
Yeah, yeah, he had a great year. JT
JT
Realmuto,
Realmuto. Um, I'd say he's on the downward trajectory, but he sits
likely.
such a high rate. I mean, he's already at such a high plateau that
Yeah,
he's got a long way to go before he becomes average.
yeah.
And then your boy Nick,
Ugh,
uh, he's still in there. He's a
yeah,
threat,
yeah.
but
That's a
and the
scary
sort of
lineup.
guy that all of a sudden he could just be awesome. You know what I mean?
And guess what? Halfway through the season, you get a guy who won the MVP 2 years ago in Bryce Harper. So
Yep, yep,
there's
yep.
just something. This is not a team you want to play in October. I mean, it's one of those every time you watch the Phillies in the postseason, you're like, man, they're gonna find a way to pull this one out. It's like they feel like a team of destiny that came just short. They really did.
Yep. My one and they meet my criteria of having three strong starters in
Yeah.
Aaron Nola, Zach Wheeler,
Yeah.
and take your pick of Walker versus Suarez,
Yeah.
same player as
Yeah.
we've discussed. Now, the big gaping hole, and probably the reason why they weren't a strong contender in the East last year is their bullpen.
Yeah.
And though they signed Craig Kimbrell, at this point in time, I don't really view that as a strong push.
Me neither.
Um, they just haven't done anything to help shore that up. So,
Craig
um,
Kimbrell is becoming the new Wade Davis, who had like a really
yeah,
good season, and then everyone's like, "Oh, it's Wade Davis," or maybe Andrew Miller too, right? These relievers
mhm,
that they had a couple amazing performances, and everyone just inflates their value consistently. That's the new
yep,
Craig Kimbrell in my eyes,
yep, yep.
and
Kimbrell
you're
was
right.
awesome back when he was with the Braves, and he had a year or two with the Sox, but
Yeah,
he's fairly washed up at this
yeah,
point at
yeah.
35.
Agreed.
So, their Achilles heel is going to be the bullpen.
Yeah.
But I expect big things out of them, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, and we'll talk about our final predictions at a different time. But it's one of those things where any one of these three teams, doesn't matter if it's the Phillies, if it's the Braves or the Mets, you could realistically tell me that any of these three teams could win the World Series, and I would fully believe it. I mean, that these rosters, Atlanta, I know you might disagree with me. Maybe they took a little bit of a step back in terms of on paper, their roster, but for the Phillies and for the Mets, both took tremendous steps forward in sort of solidifying their position here. So when it comes to the NL East, it's really two specific tiers. The last year, the Phillies were kind of, sort of in the conversation and not really true threats to the NL East crown. But this year, it's a direct two separate tiers. But there is one team as we continue on here through the NL East that I think, and I know that you've given them credit before, but one team that I think might be ready to take the jump pretty soon here, still a little bit away, is the Miami Marlins. They certainly have the pitching to do it. The question is, what can they do at the plate? Now, their only major signing was getting Jean Segura from the aforementioned Philadelphia Phillies. Signed him to a little 2-year, $17 million deal. Not bad, solid ball player. A guy that will probably play every day for the Marlins, you would presume. But, this is an organization that doesn't really make big free agency splashes. They kind of build from within. What do you make of the Marlins, Zeke? This is a team that was kind of hanging around in the wild card discussion for a bit last year. Then you had the injury to Jazz Chisholm. You had Pablo Lopez, who had a great start, kind of come back down to earth, and things kind of fell apart towards the end. Do you think the Marlins are a legitimate wild card contender, or do you think they're still quite a few pieces away?
I think at this point, I feel less confident with the Marlins than I did going into last season. And part of it's just because the division itself, at least as it appears currently, is so strong.
Yeah, I would agree.
I mean, like you said, top heavy. It's going to make it really hard for a team like this to succeed.
Yeah.
If they're in a different division, maybe a weaker division, we'll get into later.
If they're in the
maybe.
NL Central, yeah.
Yeah. But a few of the question marks that I had last year as potential breakout candidates just didn't seem to do that, especially with the bats. You had Chisholm. He was awesome. No doubt about it. Segura is a good veteran piece, brings some stability. He had a great year last year with the Phillies. And then you got a hodgepodge of players.
Yeah.
And not one of them batted over 260 last year, with a few guys in the low 200s. Jorge Soler came off the great postseason with the Braves, didn't really do a whole lot, was a little bit hurt here and there. Jesus Sanchez, left fielder that I thought might break out, have some pop. He didn't do much. And at some point, you gotta
after April,
right.
He was really hot to start, but you're right. He just kind of fizzled out.
But then they have the rotation of your dreams. But in such a loaded division that has plenty of teams with good rotations, they just don't have the bats to hang close, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's fair. They had their big signing last year was Avisail Garcia. I mean, he kind of was lost in the shuffle of things. Jesus Aguilar as well. I mean, he hasn't been the same as he was when he was in Milwaukee.
Right.
But as you mentioned, rotation as strong as they come. I think it kind of tells you a little bit about what a franchise is doing based on what they do at the trade deadline. I think a lot of people last year were looking at Miami and expecting them to make some moves. I think they were expecting Pablo Lopez to be a guy that they sold high on. As I mentioned, the first half of the season, he was amazing. He was sort of in the Cy Young contention. And then things the wheels fell off a little bit, but they could have gotten really solid value for him at the trade deadline. People were even talking about Sandy Alcantara, who was by far the most dominant pitcher in baseball last season. I mean, outside of maybe Justin Verlander, I think Sandy pitched better. I really do, especially
Mhm.
considering the division that he was in. The guy was amazing, but there were talks that they might really sell high on him and get a big haul back, but they didn't. So I think that kind of gives you a sort of look into what the Marlins are trying to do. They really believe in this young core rotation. If they want to win, they're going to need these guys to continue the success that they're having. And
Right.
you add Jesus Luzardo, he's shown flashes. I mean, he's still kind of a project. Sixto Sanchez coming back. He missed last year. And Trevor Rogers. I mean, that's a guy that's kind of disappointing. He was in the AL or the NL Rookie of the Year talks in 2021. He really kind of fell off this last year. So if he can kind of turn things around, you never know. I mean, this was a team in the COVID 2020 year. They were in the wild card and they beat the Cubs in the first round. So I think if these guys play to their potential, if Jazz Chisholm comes back and hits like he was previously before his injury, I don't think with the expanded postseason, I don't think it's crazy to say that they could find a way to sneak into the wild card.
Yeah, certainly a possibility.
I'm not betting.
How
on
crazy
it.
would that be, though?
Yeah.
How crazy would that be if
all three wild card teams are in the East?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the West and you say, well,
San Diego and LA.
we'll,
Yeah.
we'll get into it, but
Well,
yeah, certainly a possibility. Sorry, Central, but probably not going to be you.
No, it's definitely not.
Yeah.
But I think the only way that happens where the Marlins get into the postseason, kind of as we mentioned, logistically, it's hard to have four teams from the same division. It would probably take one of the three teams ahead of them either having some major issues in terms of meshing or in terms of injuries as well, which is not unprecedented. I mean, that could happen. But considering how strong the division is and how many games they'll have to play against these guys, it's a tough road, but I don't think it's impossible.
John, do you think that if the Marlins were in a different division, do you think the Braves would have made a pretty good trade partner with them with some of these? Or a guy like, I don't know, Alcantara.
Yeah.
Probably, I mean, it would have taken
a lot
selling the farm to get Alcantara, probably, but I don't know. I was looking for some pitching help for the Braves, but I guess most of their guys are pretty young too, so maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that they are solid. They get forgotten a lot, and I would really love. I mean, I know I don't want it to be the Braves, but I would really love if the Philadelphia Phillies just kind of sputtered a bit and Miami came through and made some noise. That'd be great. It'd be great.
Absolutely.
If they were in
the underdog story.
Yeah. They really are perennially. They've won 2 World Series and they're still the underdogs somehow.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's about it. I don't think they're true contenders in the NL East, but they're kind of a fun thought. Speaking of non-contenders in the East, the very last thing that we have to talk about, and we won't have much to say about them, the Washington Nationals. I mean,
and that's it, folks.
Yeah.
That's it for the night.
Honestly, though, I mean, this team's in a full rebuild. Like, let's not kid ourselves. They were in a full rebuild when they traded Max Scherzer and Trey Turner in 2021. They even dug the hole even further, even deeper when they traded away Juan Soto and Josh Bell, who was on an expiring. But Juan Soto, I mean, their key piece. They're like, you know what? This guy's gone. We can't negotiate with him. We can't get a long-term deal done. This guy wants to win a title. It's not going to be in Washington. He wants to win another title, I should say. And it wasn't going to be in Washington. So, I mean, the big thing here for Nationals fans, unfortunately, is making sure your guys get experience. They did sign Jeimer Candelario, who is looking to rebound after a horrible season in Detroit. But that's about it in terms of roster moves and changes.
Well, I will say Jeter Downs.
Oh, yes, that's a good point.
Sputtered.
Yep.
He got claimed from the Red Sox.
Yep.
And Michael Chavis.
Yeah.
He's kind of had up and downs with the Red Sox as well. So couple pieces that
Yeah,
could end up
a
in
couple.
their favor. We'll see.
Zeke, those are a couple lottery tickets, I think. At this point in their career, a couple lottery tickets. Because,
Fill the stadium,
yeah,
guys that not going to win the division, but at least make things a little more interesting for the fans, I think.
yeah, but you are right. Jeter Downs, I mean, when he was coming up through the system, there was talks of him being he was an astounding prospect and big talks around him. You're absolutely right, but just didn't really pan out for him. And he gets a new start. There's a couple good pieces. I'm really excited to see once Mackenzie Gore gets comfortable. I know he was a lot of buzz about him. They had to San Diego had to part with him in the Soto deal. So he gets a shot. Josiah Gray has shown some signs of promise.
CJ Abrams.
CJ Abrams as well. Yeah. So there's young guys there. It's going to be fun to follow their stats. But in terms of a team as a whole, I mean, it's going to be a long couple years here for the Nats.
Hey, John, they still have Victor Robles, man.
This is the year. This is really
the year. Bases are
5 years
bigger. This is going to be the year he breaks out, man.
The only time I ever fleeced Zeke in a fantasy baseball trade, and it wasn't a fleece at the time, but it turned out to be the most lopsided trade. Zeke really wanted Victor Robles. He was buying into the hype heading into 2019.
Oh, gosh.
And guess who did you give up, Zeke, at the time?
I don't even want to say it. But it starts with Raphael and
Rafael Devers. And he pretty much won me the league. Oh, that's one thing we forgot to mention at the top of the show, Zeke. I took the crown back this year in fantasy baseball. I probably had I probably had the most dominating performance because AKA I had Aaron Judge, and he pretty much him and Sandy Alcantara, who I traded for at the start of the year. I mean, I just literally rode those guys all year. So
building off of that, and since we're in the NL East preview here, or recap, whatever we want to call it, did you know that before we set our keepers, I made a trade with the guy that had Julio Urias, Sandy Alcantara, and I made a trade with him. I can't remember. It may have been Correa that I gave up, but I wanted to add a pitcher. And I had my pick between Julio Urias, Sandy Alcantara, and I could have had either one of them.
You picked Julio.
I went Urias, and I regretted it the entire season.
Well, I tell you what, Zeke, though. I tell you what. At the time, I would have done the same thing. I mean, Alcantara, he was looking good, but Urias, he had a great season in 2021, and then heading into 2022, it's like, man, Scherzer's gone, so this is gonna be the guy. He got there. It took him a little while, but to your point, that's funny about Alcantara. He was the guy in our league that wasn't kept, and everybody was like, how did this guy fall? Like, how was he not selected as a keeper? And I think Justin took him at number one, and you and I both knew. I bet you and I were probably in a bidding war of trying to talk and get Sandy, and eventually I was able.
I'm pretty sure this is one of those nights where I was up. So I'm a guy who goes to sleep at like 9 o'clock usually, and here we are at 10 o'clock. But this was one of those nights where I was in a bidding war with Justin, specifically I think for Alcantara.
Yeah.
And I was up until like 11:30, 12:30 at night. And I didn't even know Justin was talking to John. And then all of a sudden, a trade for a guy that I wanted goes through with John, and I'm just mad at both of them.
Hey, Justin has learned. Justin knows what he's got, and it's you and I against one another on almost every guy that we have our eyes on. And he creates a bidding war. There've been a couple where I've been on the other side where I'm like, dang it, I wanted him. Zeke, who was it? You were really trying to I can't remember who it was. You wanted Aaron Judge early last season, and I said, no, I'm not going to do it. And thank God I didn't. But no. So
hey, it's about time for those sort of talks, John. It's about time to start talking some trades.
Hey, I'm open.
It's coming.
Hey, football is done. You and I decided to take a season off from winning our leagues. We figured that if we kept taking everybody's money, they wouldn't want to play with us anymore. So we
That's
collectively
right. It's the long-term
decided,
play.
yeah, we collectively decided to have stinkers in fantasy football league.
Yep.
We're playing the long game.
It's for the people, John.
It's for the
It's for the
people,
people.
giving them what they want, which is a title, and it's very, very hard to come by when you're playing with us.
Yep. Hey, as we kind of wrap up the good old Nationals here, one fun fact for us is, um, if you guys don't know John well enough, you should know that he's all about rankings. Whether it's ranking your favorite pizza or ranking your favorite season on Survivor, Big Brother, etc. Where would you put the Steven Strasburg contract? 7 years, 245 million. He is owed $35 million for the next 4 years, on top of, last year and the year before. Where does that rank on the worst contracts that you can remember, we'll say?
How many contracts are there of active MLB players? How many MLB players are there? Because his contract right now would be at the bottom. Whatever that number is, that is what it is.
40 times. How many teams we got?
Don't forget the minor leaguers, Zeke. It's historically horrible. And that's the thing. We just had an entire conversation, but Steven Strasburg has played so little over the last 2-3 seasons that his name didn't even come up once until right now. Let that sink in your mind.
I'm looking at it. He's got, in 2019, they won the title.
Yep.
He had,
and then they re-signed him.
A marvelous year. He got paid big time. 2020, he pitched 5 innings. 2021 is 21 2/3. 2022 is 4 2/3. And he's expected to miss probably a good chunk of the start of this season too.
So he's pitched 30 innings. 30 innings.
Divided by 35 times, 35 times 3, which would be 105 million, I think.
It's so bad.
105 million divided by 30. What's that? 30 million an inning?
Yeah.
Or is that right?
3 million an inning.
3 million an inning.
Yeah. Something
like
that.
An out. Yeah.
That's horrible. That's horrible. I mean, when that deal came through, when you and I were in optometry school, I walked over to you and I'm like, bro, that was horrible. Like, that is so bad. And you were like, yeah, that was terrible. What are they thinking? And that was before, this is a guy who's consistently had injury problems, and they signed him to this giant extension.
Yeah.
It's like, what are they doing?
Just think, we were talking about how some of these, like the shortstop deals, Trey Turner, 11 years, however many million. And we're saying, that's not going to turn out well.
Yeah.
At least those are stretched out over a period of time where the average annual value is not too bad. But we're talking 35 million a year.
Yeah.
Plus medical expenses.
Yeah. And the thing is, we're like, oh, Trey Turner, that's an overpay. But he doesn't have Strasburg literally had the injury history at the time the deal was struck. And it's just it's crazy. It's unbelievable. And
I think it's for reasons like this that the Correa deal is not done.
And it's reasons like this that Juan Soto's like, I'm out. Peace out. I'm not going to take your offer. Like, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm done. I mean, it's crazy to see. There have been teams that have fallen off quicker than the Nationals in sports. But it just shows you there's got to be they better make a 30 for 30 or something on the Nats, because this was a team that even in the 2019 season, I remember watching a game with my dad, and I turned to him and I'm like, this team's going to get blown up at the deadline. And then they somehow turned it around and went on this miraculous win, went all the way to the World Series and won it. but that was such an anomaly. Like 95 out of 100 times, probably 90, more than 99 out of 100 times. If you take where they were in May and finish out the season, the Nationals do not win the World Series that year. And now they've just completely collapsed. And they may never be relevant again.
I mean, it's going to be a while.
It's hard
John,
to see.
Last fun fact for us here today.
All right.
Okay. Let's go. Let's return to the Mets for just a second. Well, no, let's stay with the Nationals. So, talking about how bad Steven Strasburg's contract is.
Yeah.
The Nationals will pay him $35 million this year.
Gosh.
And he will likely not pitch very much. How effective he'll be, even when he does pitch, to be determined. But I'm not feeling too good about it. So $35 million. The Pittsburgh Pirates payroll. No. Hold on. Actually, the Oakland Athletics projected 2023 payroll is. What would you guess, John?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm a little scared to. I'm going to guess.
You're about to say it.
50 million.
54 million.
54 million.
So you're talking about
20 million, like a 20 million,
like 1.5 Strasburgs there.
Oh, we forgot to talk about the real star of the Washington Nationals, Patrick Corbin.
Patrick Corbin. Okay, so you can. Okay,
that guy stinks. Good segue. That guy stinks.
Good segue. Steven Strasburg, 35 million. Patrick Corbin, 23 million. That gets you to 55 million, which is the Oakland Athletics payroll.
There you go.
There you go.
You can have a whole baseball team, or you can have two horrible pitchers. What do you
exactly
want? Not that they're horrible. I shouldn't say they're terrible. They had signs of, they had a couple good years. They're World Series champions.
That's right. Now, segueing back to where we started, John.
Mm-hmm.
What did I say? 111 million in tax revenue for
the Mets. Yeah.
I think this would be our best shot here. Let's look at Cincinnati, Arizona. Okay. So Pittsburgh Pirates, we already said 55, or no, Oakland 55 million.
Mm-hmm.
Plus the Pittsburgh Pirates is 70 million. So roughly, pending the Correa deal, the Mets will pay more in taxes than the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Oakland Athletics combined payrolls.
Mm.
So
if
you want to talk about league expansion, just let Cohen fund the deal.
There you go.
We'll get our team in Nashville.
They should take that luxury tax. They should just donate it to charity. Honestly, just be like, hey, take that $100 million. Let's make a difference in this world.
You'd think you'd have to go something to that.
Yeah.
You'd think, anyways. Hold on. Let's, as we end the show, where does
luxury tax money go? I feel like that would be a good solution. Like if you're punishing teams for it, it's like, why does the MLB just keep that in revenue? Maybe they distribute it to the teams that I have no idea.
All the competitive ballots tag implemented. Special increases primary goals to encourage balance. Where does it go though? Let's see. The commissioner's office then redistributes this money in a standard manner. The first 13 million will be used under the player.
So it goes back to the league then.
Yeah, that's what it's looking like.
It should go to charity. That's my. I think that'd be cool.
You would think. I mean, I assumed it went to some sort of
some fund
nonprofit related organization of some sort, but no, it looks like it returns to the league in some manner, just distributed.
There you go.
Well, that's a terrible way to end the night, John.
Yeah.
You know what that makes me think?
What does
that makes me think that Steve Cohen probably has some sort of deal made with the other owners in the league. It's like, hey, this is going to be distributed, but
Uh-oh.
I need some of that money to make it back to me in various ways.
Uh-oh. We got the tinfoil hat.
Offshore accounts.
Tinfoil hat.
Hey, all I got is
Figured it out
headphones and Braves
early.
gear, baby.
There you go. There you go. Well, Zeke, it was a lot of fun hopping back on the microphone here and having a chat about these teams. A lot going on. We got a lot to cover. We'll plan on going towards the other Eastern Division, the AL East, which was just as chaotic, just as wild with some of the stuff going on in the other New York teams. So all the power has shifted to the Northeast with the New York Mets and the New York Yankees. So we'll have that to look forward and dive deep into on our next time on the podcast. Any parting words, Zeke?
I've got nothing, John. Just excited to be back. Glad to get going, and nice talking with you, bud.
Yes, you too. You have a great week, and we'll see you next time.